are you, Simran?
I'm good. How are you today?
Fine, thank you.
So, good morning. I'm Simran, and I'm honored to welcome someone whose work has helped shape some of the most iconic films in Indian cinema and continues to inspire upcoming storytellers around the world. She has nearly 2 decades of experience in creative media and film production and held some key roles at some of India's biggest studios. She has even worked internationally with award-winning director Craig Gillespie on Disney's $1 Million Arm. So let's give a warm welcome to Miss Malika Singh.
Thank you for having me.
So let's get to know a bit about your background. What inspired you to enter the film industry?
Great question. So a little bit of context into my background. I was born and raised in Dubai. I'm a Dubai girlie. I lived here till I was 7. And then I moved to India with my family. We lived in New Delhi, and I spent 7 years over there till I was 14, 15 years old. I moved back to Dubai. I finished my education, and then I moved to the States for undergrad. I grew up an introverted emo kid and still am that person somewhere inside, and would always seek refuge in the world of cinema and books. But even then at that age, I didn't know that there was potential for a career to explore. It was towards the end of my undergrad year in college in Atlanta. Full disclosure, I was an undeclared major. I had to really figure out what I wanted to pursue. I thought maybe something in English literature, but then I wasn't sure what work I would do after with that. And it was at that time that I watched a film, a seminal film in my life called Monsoon Wedding, that was directed by a very prolific Indian filmmaker, Meera Nair. Monsoon Wedding was the first film that I ever saw that reflected and represented me and my world and my life, specifically my life and culture growing up in New Delhi from the age of 7 to 14. I had never seen anything like that on screen before, and it transformed me. Characters spoke in a language that was familiar to me. The homes and the sets and the scenes felt very real to me. In fact, I felt like that film was an extension of my being. But the beauty of that experience was, Simran, I watched Monsoon Wedding in an art house cinema in Atlanta with a primarily non-Indian audience. Maybe 10% or 15% of the audience was Desi, and the rest were Americans. At the end of that film, which ends on a high, it's a very jubilant ending. It's a celebration of life and family and love. I saw audiences stand up and dance. And anybody who's ever watched a film in India will know that that's a big thing for us. Commercial cinema, when the hero makes an entrance, audiences jump out of their seats and they scream and they hoot and they clap and they whistle, and it's a feeling you have to experience. I experienced it for the first time in an independent cinema in America, watching an Indian film made by an Indian filmmaker set in New Delhi with a largely non-Indian audience. And it gave me goosebumps because I realized in that moment that something that felt so personal for me translated to a broader audience. And that's when I understood the true power of cinema and of storytelling. And that if you tell a story truthfully and authentically, it will find an audience and it will connect universally. So I then transferred to film school, and the rest is history.
It's really inspiring. Yeah. So how do you collaborate with directors, writers, and crew to ensure a unified vision?
That is the key, and that is one of the biggest challenges that we face with every project. Filmmakers, crew, we're strong-minded, passionate people. And as a project grows, you get more voices in the room. And the challenge really is to keep aligning vision, to keep making sure that we're on the same page and we want the same things. And I'll borrow a lot from what Metha said in her wonderful session about how, if you do it right, as a producer, as a director, if you treat the crew in a certain way where they really feel like it's their project and it's their baby, then everybody's going to come at it with 100% passion. So the key is communication. And the key is to to create an environment that feels really safe and open for people to express their opinions, solutions, come to the table with something that might be deeply personal for them, that could resonate through the work that we're trying to create. So just to keep an open channel always. Everybody on a film crew, on a film set, should feel like there's space for them to express themselves and to be heard. And some of the greatest ideas come from the most unexpected places. So to really work on communication and to create a safe environment is the best way that we can keep the singular vision that is often executed by hundreds of people, we can keep it whole.
And what was it like working internationally on Million Dollar Arm with Craig Gillespie? And how did that differ from working with other film sets, if any differences?
So working on Million Dollar Arm was a great experience for me because while I had worked in New York on a couple of Hollywood productions, more independent, this was my first time working on a Hollywood film that was shot in India. So I was able to sort of understand how a foreign crew can come in and navigate a local environment. Craig is the perfect example of a filmmaker who is trusting, who is open, and who is secure and communicative. And so what he did was at every step of the way, especially since a lot of his crew were out of their element, they were out of their depth, they were shooting in a country that many of them hadn't ever visited before. And in India, we do things a little bit differently. So it takes a minute to adapt. He found a way to entrust his crew to make mistakes, to ask silly questions, and there is no such thing as a stupid question, and to just give them that support and encouragement along the way to navigate terrain that was new for a lot of people. So Craig really brought that to the table. He was, for example, when I worked with him as his assistant towards the middle of shoot, I started working with the producers, and then Craig's assistant had to go back to the States, and they asked me if I could work with him directly for the last 2 weeks. He would regularly bring me into his trailer during breaks just to show me the scenes from the previous day. We call them dailies. And it's a practice that the directors and the producers do while they shoot. They watch the scenes from the previous day just to make sure we got everything. Because in case we've got to go in and we've got to reshoot something, then we should identify that sooner rather than later. I was an assistant, and he didn't have to, but he brought me into the conversation to get my opinion and to bring me into how he was thinking about how that scene would come together. So an incredibly collaborative filmmaker. And I would say that in my experience, I've encountered all kinds of filmmakers, and filmmakers can be, a little bit temperamental, and they can be a little bit very passionate, and sometimes passion comes out in a different way. But secure filmmakers create a really thriving working environment for creative people. Insecure filmmakers who are constantly trying to get the last word in or prove that that idea was their idea and it came from them, sometimes it creates an environment where people don't feel like doing their best work. Yeah.
So now let's get some of your personal insights on the industry. Having worked with major studios like HBO Max and Foxstar, what do you think are the key factors that make a film successful?
That's the golden question right there. Every film is a risk, and every film is a little bit of a gamble. You never know what's going to stick. But one of the things that we really look out for is, firstly, a story that connects universally. We like to hire diversity in companies because we want people who are coming from different backgrounds and different experiences. We want to hear from their perspective on things, because a diverse group of people is a microcosm for the world. And we want stories to travel as broadly and as widely as possible. So the first thing is does this story connect? Will it connect with me? Will it connect with you? Could it connect with my mom? Could it connect with somebody who doesn't necessarily know that world, specifically the world of the film? And then to just identify the creative voices who can bring their craft and their experience to really honor the story. And so at studios, what we do is we try to really keep our ear to the ground to understand who's out there in terms of emerging talent, voices that we really want to push and enable and see what comes from there. You know, we look at a lot of short films, we go to festivals, we try to scout for talent, we try to look for a spark, and then when we make the decision to enable a voice, then it's really about trusting them as much as possible and giving them all of the resources and the tools that are required for them to feel safe and do their best work.
And what do you think are the biggest shifts that you've observed in the film and media industry over the past 5 years?
There's been a big shift, and I don't know if you guys feel it as audience members, but since the pandemic, and maybe even a few years before that, with streamers coming in and with, you know, everything sort of being available in the comfort of your living room, click of a button, pause it when you want to, binge it if you want to, people just stopped going to cinemas. We don't go to the movies as much, and it is affecting all film industries. And so one of the big changes that I've noticed is really, there are two changes that I've noticed. One is that producers are becoming more and more risk averse. They're unwilling to take a punt on something that they think might be a little bit left of center. And so therefore, a lot of the time and the money and the resources are put into creating these big tentpole films because, well, people will go and watch Mission Impossible, right? They might not go and watch a comedy in the cinema, but they'll go and watch a big action, you know, set pieces, cars blowing up, helicopters. That's what people are coming in to watch. And what happens then is that people start to reverse engineer the process. And I think audiences feel that. I think they start to feel like, oh, this was a calculation, you know, putting in this sequence in the film feels like a little bit of a draw to get people butts in seats is how we put it. And so what's happening is that independent cinema is really struggling a little bit. You know, while there is now more than ever, it's easier for you to self-produce and put your own work out there, you still need the backing of an industry to really get the word of the film out to the audience. And so independent cinema has taken a hit, and I hope that it's able to revive itself. Executives are becoming a little bit too focused on the big summer tentpole films, but then the question to be asked is, what happens in the months in between? What happens to that cinema experience? So it's been a little bit of a COVID effect, and so I always encourage people, if you really love movies, go and watch it in the way that the filmmaker wants you to watch it, which is in a big dark room on a massive screen with an audience that is attentive, and to have that collective experience, sound, visuals, it all comes together in the cinema, and that's the magic of it. And so many of us had our first experiences watching film in a cinema. And so if we can retain that magic a little bit, then it helps the industry thrive. And I think it would also make for more diverse storytelling. And we'll get to hear from more filmmakers who haven't necessarily been working on big budget films for 10, 15 years. And maybe they produce that little independent film or a short film, and they just need a platform. So go to the movies more, guys. Just go watch films. And you're getting to eat popcorn today, but, you know, always a good chance to go and eat more popcorn. Yeah,
definitely. So how do you assess whether a script or concept has the potential to become a strong production?
The first thing, of course, is does it feel like it was told authentically? Whoever is writing the script, Is it something that's personal to the writer? Are they bringing something from their own life experience into it? Because that's what gives something texture, and that's what makes something feel lived in. And whether we realize it or not, that's what we respond to. We respond to something that feels authentic and original. So it starts with that. It really does. It starts with the writing. And then from there on, it's really about finding ways to just push and enable voices to come out and be a little bit experimental.
I see. And could you walk us through the creative development process and your role in shaping that journey?
Yes, it's actually quite fascinating, and it's a job that I really love because it has the perfect mix of creative and pragmatic, which is the task of all producers. Sometimes people refer to certain producers as creative producers, but I would argue that all producers need to be creative. So I think the thing to keep in mind is that an idea can come from anywhere. A lot of the times, a filmmaker will read an article or they'll listen to a podcast and it'll expose them to something that they just hadn't experienced before. They didn't know this thing was happening in the world. And then they'll pursue it, and it'll take them down a journey of discovery. So in development, what we do is we're obviously always wanting to hear from filmmakers who want to tell their own stories or who are just passionate about a subject or something. But we also we also look at books, and we look at IP, and we look at various things. You can look at a graphic novel and say, hey, this is something that we want to bring to an audience that maybe doesn't have access to this graphic novel. It's not a part of our culture. How do we take some of those themes and make it a little bit more accessible? So what we do is we collaborate with filmmakers, writers, authors, agents. People come to us with stories, and a great story can come from anywhere. And then it becomes about figuring out, all right, who's the vision for this story? Who has the right syntax? Which filmmaker can we bring on board? Who's going to add to this? And what writers can we pair them with? If we're taking an article and we're deciding that this should be a story, then who's the writer that we think is going to know this world and is really going to bring add some value to it? And then the process just becomes about getting interested parties on board, getting people excited by the project, getting them to want to lend their time and their expertise and help give it some shape and some form. There are legalities involved. You've got to get rights for a book. You've got to sign contracts. You've got to get people on the same page. And then it just becomes a process of crewing up. You have filmmakers who've worked with, sometimes the same editors and DPs and production designers, and they want to bring on their collaborators. And in my experience, I've always felt very strongly, if you like a filmmaker's work and you want to entrust them with a project, go with who they want to work with, because they have a shorthand, they have an instinct. This is a relationship they want to explore. They want to creatively explore the dynamic and see what comes from it. We get a crew together. There's an extensive period of pre-production. A lot of filmmakers will argue that there's never enough time to prep for a film, but typically what we do is we look at about 3 to 5 months of prep. 5 months if you're lucky. Most filmmakers don't get 5 months, and then however long it takes to shoot. And that can tend to be sometimes the longest process, because there are a lot of logistics to factor in. If you're shooting something that's set over winter, then you've got to shoot somewhere where it's cold and somewhere where it looks like winter, and then you only have so many hours of daylight, so you can only shoot so much in a day. So an extensive production process followed by post-production, which can also take a very long time, and depending on whether it's a project that has a lot of visual effects or SFX, then that adds to the timeline. And then we get great people on board to help us market the film and bring it to an audience, and then we release it to an audience, and then they get to tell us whether or not our time was spent well, which is the most daunting part of the whole process, but can also be the most gratifying.
Yes, that was truly fascinating. So in your experience, what would you say is the biggest difference between working on independent films and big studio-backed films?
So in independent cinema, we describe it as a process of beg, borrow, and steal. Because nobody's really throwing money at us to make the project, and all we're trying to do is just convince people that we want to work with that, like, we really need you on this project, and we might not have a lot of money to give you, but passion is what drives an independent project. And the struggle is to really get industry people to get into the room and hear you out and lend their support, back you in whatever way possible. In a studio, you know, it's the job of the studio to churn out X number of films in a year. Studios refer to it as a slate. And in every year, you have a slate of however many films or projects that you really need to push out in that year. And that becomes your goal as an employee, as a studio. You've got to make sure you're able to at least get some of these projects off the ground. You've got to have a certain number of releases in a year. It feels very technical. And so when you're doing a studio project, it feels like all the resources are there. And, you know, all the support is there. But then you also have a lot of people in the room telling you what they think it should be. And that becomes a little bit of a tussle. Having said all of that, it's not always true that it's easier to make a film in a studio, or it's always going to be really painful to make a film independently. I worked on a film when I was working at Fox Star Studios called Bombay Velvet. And that film notoriously was a box office disaster. It bombed badly, really badly. It was made by an independent filmmaker who's a fantastic filmmaker. His name is Anurag Kashyap. And, you know, most filmmakers in India will cite him as their influence for wanting to become filmmakers. He makes really strong films, but his films don't necessarily make a lot of money, but they're cult favorites. People love them. And so, you know, somebody at a studio thought, let's give this guy a lot of money to make the film that he always wanted to make. And, you know, the budget was huge, and, you know, really anything that was asked for was given, and it didn't really pan out. So there was a lot to learn from that experience. But what I took away from it is money doesn't solve the problem necessarily. There are a lot of other elements that can come into play with determining whether or not the project's actually going to work or not. So, yeah.
Thank you. Those were very intriguing views, and I'm sure the audience loved hearing that. So let's cut the professional talk and let's have some fun with a rapid fire round.
All right, I'm ready.
All right, you can pass if you don't have an answer. Ready?
Yes.
Okay, let's go. Who would you say are the underrated heroes on every set?
The PAs, the assistants, especially art department and production. First one's in, last one's out.
Dream actor or dream script?
Dream script.
What's one cliche about producers that is totally true?
I struggle with this. Sometimes taking IP and not giving credit for it. There's some producers who do that. It's not good.
Which would you say is harder, cutting scenes or cutting costs?
Cutting costs.
If your job had a soundtrack, what would the title track be?
Poker Face, Lady Gaga.
Oh, interesting. If you had a superpower on set, what would it be?
The ability to pivot and be adaptive on an hour-by-hour basis.
What's one actor or actress that you'd love to produce for?
In India, I would love to produce for Vidya Balan. She's one of my favorite actors and an incredible person. And in the West, probably Zendaya. I really like what she's doing. She's a very exciting, fearless actor.
Definitely. What's one word to describe your journey in film?
Magical.
What would you say is your most used app during production?
Most used app, the weather app.
Ah, interesting.
Truly, yes.
And finally, what's one skill no one tells you a producer must have?
Empathy, really, across the board in selecting stories and in treating your crew right. Empathy, yeah.
That was really good. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You did well.
So as we move to our final segment, Just one last segment. We have a few questions from us students on your expert advice. So first off, what's one thing students should understand about storytelling beyond what we see on screen?
I guess to really understand the sheer volume of how many people it took to tell this one singular story, it doesn't get credited enough. Sometimes it feels like you're watching something and it feels like, oh, somebody must have had this idea and then they wrote a draft and then they took it to somebody and they liked it and they gave money to it. And I mean, it doesn't really work as simply as that. A lot of the time, something that you see that feels so effortless took a lot of writing and a lot of rewriting, and it's painful. The writing process is very difficult. And the more players that come onto the project and the more voices that come in, the more you're kind of challenged at every step of the way to almost defend the original concept and the original idea. And you almost feel like you're debating every day at work. And it's wonderful. It's wonderful to actually keep having to explain and convince another person who's coming in that this is why we want to do this. It also allows you to come back to what's important about it. In the industry, we always ask filmmakers who come to us with something, why this story, why now? Why is it important for you to tell this story now? And so in order to really arrive at something that feels whole and that feels thought out and that doesn't feel like, you know, a first or a second draft, takes a lot of effort, and it takes being open to hearing from people and really understanding that when you're open to collaboration, and like Mehta said, this is one of the only art forms that you could do it on your own, but there's a reason we don't do it on our own. You know, you can make a painting on your own, you can make a song on your own, you can write a book on your own, but you need people to make films, and you need people to tell cinematic stories. So, yeah, I would say it's probably just the effort that goes into something that you think somebody probably just did one or two drafts on.
And lastly, what advice would you give to a student who dreams of working in the film industry and doesn't know where to begin?
Like Mehta said, you know, you've got to put yourself out there a little bit, reach out to people who you admire and who you want to work with, and you'd be surprised. You know, people in the industry are always looking to get, you know, young energy in, and we extract from you as much as, you know, you might learn from us. But I think the one piece of advice I would really give anybody who wants to enter a world of cinematic storytelling is really expand your knowledge of cinema. Go out there and explore as much cinema as you can. If you only watch the same kinds of films that you like, whether it's a genre or a particular actor, and you only watch that, then I fear that you might limit a little bit the potential of who you can be and what might interest you. So watch films, watch world cinema, watch things that you don't think you like, and when you do like something, try to understand what it is that the filmmaker was trying to say, and nerd out on it. You know, I mean, you guys are really lucky. You live in an age where almost everything that is ever made has some kind of background or backstory that's available for you to access. So, you know, broaden your taste, develop your taste, and you know, just keep the curiosity alive. Don't be so, you know, closed-minded or set in a particular genre or a particular style of filmmaking. And also watch Wong Kar-wai. Wong Kar-wai is an amazing filmmaker. So that was a great recommendation. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Ms. Malika, for such a thoughtful look into your industry. I'm sure we've all learned so much from you here and your journey, and we're so grateful to have you here today at the Think and Thrive Summit. Let's give it up for Ms. Malika,
Thank
please.
you, Simran. Thank you so much.